So here we are, yay, on our 6th episode of the Redbud Suds Camper Chats. We have Mark of Intrinsic Provisions with us tonight. We are so pleased and thrilled, Mark, that you are able to join us from Massachusetts. My name is Aubrey. For those of you who may be finding this Camper Chat for the first time, the Camper Chats are a space that we've created here during the pandemic when we're not doing as many shows on the road, where from my little teardrop camper, I host conversations around people and organizations that inspire us for the environmental advocacy and activism work that they are doing creatively through their businesses or their organizations. So just a quick little shameless plug, Redbud Suds is what makes this wonderful conversation possible. We at Redbud Suds, we're a thoughtfully clean shower bar company. Our goal is to help kick plastic out of your shower. So we do this by a 4-in-1 shower bar that helps you simplify your routines, that helps keep you connected to the outdoors in your everyday life. And ultimately, we're here so that we can continue to protect this wonderful natural world that we rely on. If you haven't tried Redbud Suds, obviously you know where to find it, either on our website or any of the shops that carry our suds, like Mark's at Intrinsic Provisions. So with no further ado, I am going to introduce Mark. Mark, I would love to hear you share how you got here, kind of like your story in a nutshell, what inspired you to start Intrinsic Provisions and what you hope to accomplish.
Hi, Aubrey. First of all, thanks a ton for having me. I'm definitely really excited about this and about carrying Redbud Suds. It's just one of those companies that shares the values that that we have, and it smells really good too. People walk into the store and they're like, "Oh, it smells really good." I'm like, "I have nothing to do with it." But um, yeah, so how did I get here? I spent um most of my career after college in advertising and marketing. For whatever reason, I got out of college, and I should have gone out west and gone skiing, and I did not do that. I felt this urgent need to like jump into the workforce, and I had an interest in advertising, and I made the decision to go back to New York City, which is where I grew up for the most part. Um, and try to get a job in advertising in arguably one of the worst advertising climates on record. My first job was actually on the PR side with an amazing woman who is still a mentor today, a woman named Leslie Grossman. And as much as I loved her, I realized that I didn't necessarily love PR. As it just I respected the discipline completely, but it wasn't it didn't interest me enough. And I really wanted to be a part of a sort of bigger creative process. And so I went to work for an ad agency, believe it or not, which was the advertising agency for Joe Camel. And keep in mind, this is like the early 90s. And so people were like still smoking in offices.
Different time.
Way different times. Wasn't quite Mad Men. It didn't quite look like that. We didn't have to wear suits. Like we were super casual and all that stuff. But it was crazy. Um, and I didn't last long in that agency, in part because it was smoking. It was awful. I didn't smoke, but like it wasn't a really great place to work. Um, but I would continue my career and do pretty well at it. Sort of climb the ladder that is like the standard. You start off as an assistant account executive, you become an account executive, and then an account supervisor and a director, and on your way up the chain.
Mhm.
And but with that, uh, advertising can often be an inherently dishonest business, because like at the end of the day, you're trying to convince people to buy shit,
Mhm.
and you can do really powerful work, and you can be really effective, but more often than not, agencies and are guided by clients who are really worried about job security because of quarterly earnings and brand,
Mhm.
uh, you know, how their brand is viewed by any number of factors. And um, and no matter how smart uh, the work you think you might create is, most clients don't have the um, sort of fortitude uh, to really do work that challenges
Mm.
any.
Hmm.
And so over time, I uh, got tired of it, and I had sort of made some changes here and there. I had worked in consumer market research. I actually I started a business, a consumer market research business, and I sold it, and then ran my division for them for a little while. But the whole time I sort of stayed connected to advertising, marketing,
Hmm.
really trying to figure out uh, brand direction and so forth. Um, and but after a while, like I I couldn't really sustain selling the BS,
Hmm.
and so
It's interesting. I'd never heard that backup to your story before, but it makes what intrinsic provisions is now make even more sense than what it did before. Which,
uh,
yeah, I mean, for people who don't know intrinsic provisions, just the brief bit that I love so much about it is that it is built on brands that stand for something. So marketing isn't, when you talk about the brands that you carry there at your store, you have all the reason to blast their goodness from the rooftops, or shout their goodness from the rooftops.
yeah, and that's really, I mean, uh so I had, I don't know, the past like 7, 8, like probably 10 years. So I had ended up at an agency in New York City, and I was commuting from New York, or from Boston to New York,
Hmm.
which uh,
Is that a
was
long commute, not being from there? I'm not. Sounds
it's about
terrible.
3.5, 4 hour car
Oh.
ride, or 3.5, 4 hour train ride. I would mix it up and take either the train or the car.
Mhm.
Um, but and I was paid really, really well. I ran account service and operations for this big agency in New York, and but I was absolutely miserable. I missed my kids. My marriage was like on death's door, and this certainly cemented it.
Mm.
Um, and and so you know I I realized then, like, I had to quit. I had to like go and like
Mm.
just try to be closer to my, at the very least, closer to my kids.
Mm.
And so and it's funny, like if there's one common theme that I've had throughout my life, it's that there have been really, really meaningful people who have offered really, really sage advice to me that that has stood with me. And so one of my mentors is this guy named Paul McKinnon, who I sat on a board with for a long time, and for whatever reason, we became good friends. And he's older. He ran human resources for Dell, and then he ran human resources for Citigroup, like big, big, big behemoth jobs. But if you get to know the guy, who's originally from Austin, Texas, one of the quiet, most affable, sort of congenial people you could ever meet. He has a degree in behavioral science from MIT, and which means he can size you up to the point of discomfort in about a matter of 30 seconds.
I love and hate people like that.
Oh my God. It's like, so
they're great to have around, but really annoying.
So one night we're one of my really good friends and I are out to dinner with Paul, and he tells us about a study that MIT had done where they tracked the decision making of MIT executive MBAs over the course of like 25 years. And they found that there were about 7 or 8 things of which you could have one of that would guide your decision making in your career choices. So I immediately, my buddy John and I were like, all right, like, what are we? So he looked at me and he said, "Your family." He's like, "For the love of God, if you would leave Boston, you could be the chief marketing officer at any company in the world." And he's like, "But you won't leave Boston, and it's largely because of your kids." And I was like, okay, I feel very exposed now. And then, and I asked, what is it for him? And he said, I've taken every job that I'm not supposed to succeed at, which he then goes on and succeeds at, but he's like, family be damned. And, he's like, I'm just blessed to have an absolutely amazing wife, who understands and puts up with me. So, people like Paul McKinnon are a constant force have been a constant force throughout my life, without a doubt. So even as, a marriage ended, like absolutely like floundering, trying to figure out like, what do I do? Like, how am I able to spend enough time with my kids? Like what, like everything just sucked. And I ended up going back to another agency in the Boston area. And I had big jobs and I was paid well and all that stuff. But at one point, about a year or so in, it was a Friday afternoon, come down to the conference room and you're fired. And I was like, wow. And I knew exactly how it happened. And I knew, I knew the people sort of behind it. And, but a friend of mine asked me, he said, like, what do you own of this? And I couldn't answer immediately. And he's like, all right, I'm going to just tell you. He's like, you got asked off of 4 pieces of business. He's like, you can't do it anymore. He's like, you got asked off of pieces of business, not because you're not smart, because you just don't have the capacity to tell clients what they want to hear with a straight face. And he was so right. So at that point, I really had to just sit back and figure out, like, all right, what am I going to do? And all of a sudden, sort of all these things started to happen, where there were people in my life who sort of reappeared and said, I believe in you, and I'm willing to invest in you if I believe in the idea that you might have.
Hmm.
And so I had written a white paper for a friend at Boston Consulting Group on the state of retail and shopping. It was like 25 pages long, and it was in response to a few sort of data points that they had that they couldn't really figure out. And I had become pretty well known as somebody who sort of could look at beyond the spreadsheet and look at culture and figure out like what are things that might be driving behavior.
Hmm.
And so my friend Simon looked at it. He's like, dude, this is amazing. I have no idea what to do with it. I think there's probably a business in there somewhere. Thanks. Like, I'm not sure how to like take this and operationalize it against anything, but it's really, really smart. Um, and I think at that point I sort of knew there was an idea for a business, which was the beginning of Intrinsic.
Hmm.
Um, the the short of it is that I felt like um, most retail was over leveraged by property. Um, that the desire for malls as we used to know them were fading.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that Instagram was effectively becoming the biggest shopping mall in the world. You take Pinterest, you take Instagram, Etsy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, you know, Around that time, my wife bought me a wallet, a Benjamin Bott wallet. It's a guy in Gloucester, Massachusetts,
Not
and
familiar with that.
which is a beautiful fishing community that's also a wonderful arts and theater community as well. And
Cool.
it's this beautiful handmade wallet that's probably to this day like still one of the nicer things that I own. I own a pair of Truman boots too, but like that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Simple.
it's got like the perfect patina. But in the amount of I've had this for I don't know 6 years, 7 years, and it's not even close to like broken in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and so here's this guy in Gloucester making a valuable good at a level of quality that's far and away above anything you would get from Coach.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he's not driven by trying to become Coach.
Mm-hmm.
He's driven by making really nice stuff, making a fair and honest living at it, and then traveling for 1 to 3 months out of the year if he can play his cards right and
Mm-hmm.
make enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so that whole story just it resonated with me in a way that I sort of believed that we could start a store with the intent on being small, and focusing on smaller brands driven by people who just cared about what it was they were making. And it was like I think I heard Dan Abrams from Flylow at one point say, um, you know, I don't want much. I'd love to be a millionaire and ski 100 days a year.
Mm-hmm.
right? Like he's not saying a billionaire, like saying a millionaire.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember listening to the Stitch Fix podcast on or the How I Built This podcast. And
Awesome podcast.
yeah, so that's my like one of my all-time favorite podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And but she was talking about how she couldn't raise any money because she couldn't get to $1 billion valuation.
Oof.
And that's just like, that's insanity.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
wild.
and and then you contrast that with the Yvon Chouinard Patagonia episode of that podcast, where he talks about the death of business as a result of quarterly earnings.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all of it is just so true.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the importance of building into your business plan, company culture, brand ethos, the value of taking time for what matters, and for relationships and connection and all of that. It's not just about money. Although
I mean, no, and don't get me wrong, listen, money makes things easier.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the end all be all, but nobody should have any illusions whatsoever that just it is an equalizer, and it just makes things easier by and large.
Mm-hmm.
And fair or not, I remember that mentor Paul McKinnon, when he was talking about just a hard truth of business. He's like, if you really want to make good money, it's via a business that's built on the backs of others. And that's a really really hard truth, but it's honest.
Mm.
And so no illusions. Like, yeah, I want to be able to make decent money, and I want to be able to make sure that my kids can have a down payment for a first house, or whatever, like whatever those things are.
Mm-hmm.
That maybe I can even have enough money to put away for grandkids college, or what have you. But I didn't approach this thinking to myself, we're going to have 100 stores, and we're going to be, we're going to sell or try to be publicly traded, or that was never, ever, ever a part of the plan.
Mm-hmm.
It was, we had a number I had a number in my head originally of like, if I get to this many stores, I think that's sustainable. And at, say, like 25 stores, it becomes unwieldy. And so at that point, if we were ever to get to that point, that would be the point at which I would literally just be like, I'm going to write down a number, give me a check, and I'm out.
We're good. Yeah.
And who knows, like we have to build one, like finish building one store. And before we can focus on 2 or 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've had a lot of challenges in the last year, opening and running a store in a pandemic, and rethinking, one of the things that I think is so interesting about Intrinsic is how you started out with a very, very strong commitment to brick and mortar, and then had to kind of shift because, the pandemic is just creating a need for a shift. But are still thinking really creatively about how you work with brands, and kind of turning what can sometimes feel like a competitive space online into one that's more collaborative. I think it'd be interesting to hear you talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's so I think, so when I started Intrinsic, sort of all these things came together, and I say it, and I think it's in a very early Instagram post of just like the amount of serendipity that occurred to enable sort of all of this to happen. And so it was, access to capital, it was getting fired from a job, it was um, finding space. Like the finding space part, I was looking a space that I wanted. I was probably going to overpay for a build out. I wouldn't have known what any of the right terminology meant for like the leases that I was getting into. Like I probably would have been so screwed and so overexposed. It would have been horrible.
I mean, when we're starting out, there's so many things that are like, we don't really know what we're getting ourselves into until we're in the thick of it. And then it's like, well, here we go.
Exactly. Like no clue whatsoever. But for whatever reason, one of my good friends locally, just gave me a nod and said she had space in the same building. And she was like, just be careful. And that's all she said, like nothing else. And so things got a little cagey, and I was kind of like, all right, I'm going to walk. And then I ran into a woman who our kids used to play soccer together. She's a really good friend. And she's like, I said, oh, this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to open the store. I'm trying to find space. And we said goodbye. And then she goes and she runs into this other person. And this woman's like, oh, well, I'm building this house behind my store. And I'm going to have this retail space. And if you know of anybody, and immediately like connection was made.
What?
And it was literally like, we texted each other, walked in to meet her, and it was like, well, I actually want both the spaces, not just one.
Ooh, that's awesome.
It was like, yeah. And so we, like, as a family, we all came to look at it, and it was a done deal. So like I left for Christmas that year before with having space. And then I went to Outdoor Retailer that January, and then started just hardcore pitching the idea. And with the plan on opening that Memorial Day weekend. And then when it came to the fixtures, like that was another thing. I didn't know anything about building fixtures, but a friend of mine had pointed me to a business in Minnesota called Wilson and Willie's and said, oh, this store is really cool. You should follow them. And no sooner than I committed to the space that they throw up on their Instagram story, like, we're selling all our stuff.
Wow, that's awesome.
And so I checked in with them to find out, like, why are you selling all your stuff? Is it like bad juju that I need to know about? They're like, no, we have another business, and the store is kind of a distraction to that business, and we own the building, so we're just going to sublease the, and I was like, oh, okay, this is all good.
That's awesome.
I went to Minnesota, and my buddy who lived in Minnesota like went and checked it out. He's like, dude, I think this stuff is awesome.
Cool.
And so we, found movers, and we came out and got it.
Made it all happen.
And it all happened. But if I had to build all this stuff by myself, like, it never would have happened.
Yeah. There's a reason why Redbud Suds doesn't have a physical store. We love people like you that carefully curate the space and make it beautiful and so welcoming. And then, yeah.
So, I mean, I had it in my head that this was going to be like, I had it in my head what I wanted it to look like. Back to other friends, a friend of mine owned he's my age, and he owned a car service business of all things. And a really successful car service business, which just seems like, weird for somebody who's, 50. Because a car service business sounds like an old business. And
why not?
but his rub was that he serviced blue chip companies because he had set it up so that he had all these retired police officers and FBI agents and all this. So he met a level of security that like Uber couldn't meet.
Hmm.
Um, so he had all these like really amazing corporate contracts. So it was just an amazing space. But at one point he said, just you have to be able to shift.
Mhm.
And those were words that I took to heart pretty
Mhm.
seriously. And so without a doubt, there were times um, when I had to shift. I mean, when I started, I had thought we're going to have 8 to 10 brands on what we call the feature brand side, which is the side I'm sitting on now. And then on the other side, we're going to have all these curated accessories. And I thought like, oh, like, everybody's going to be fighting to like be a part of this feature brand space, this
Mhm.
650 square feet. And that wasn't true.
Mhm.
Like, but I also realized that that wasn't what um, was sustainable,
Mhm.
because really at the end of the day, consumers can um, give a leap of faith to some extent, but they're not gonna give, like, they want validation.
Hmm.
And
And kind of things that are known or familiar, that kind
yeah,
of thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
and known, familiar, trusted.
Mhm.
And so Stio was one of the first big brands, like, not, and Stio's not big, but one of the more well-known brands that
Mm.
we were able to establish a relationship with. And
Gotcha. So just if I can jump in real quick. So you, I mean, this is another thing I think is so fascinating about, getting to know your store, and I'd love to come in someday. I
yeah,
mean,
that would be amazing.
um, but just from, looking at your website, which, you just told me that you have a online component that is actually live as of what,
As of
today?
yesterday,
Yesterday? Congratulations.
yeah,
Um, so a lot of the brands that you feature are ones that I have not previously heard of necessarily.
yeah,
And I think it's really interesting. And I think, some of the Redbud Suds community would probably find fascinating too, as we're heading into winter and we're thinking about COVID-19 and the realities of like, it's a lot safer to hang out outside with people than it is inside with people. I, for one, am like gearing up to just be on my porch in like my ski suit in the middle of, Canton, Ohio, so that I can spend time, being with people that aren't, in my immediate family or
yeah.
closest bubble. Um,
Like
so
people buying those like restaurant like heat things
theaters,
for,
yeah.
for their houses now. Like,
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I haven't gone that far yet,
yeah,
but I am kind of curious, if you have any brands in particular that you would recommend that are maybe not necessarily the most heard of ones, but ones that have a really strong mission, a really good, place in the world, that can both, serve the purpose of keeping you warm when you're, out in the middle of the woods or skiing or whatever, but also sitting on the porch staying warm in COVID.
I mean, for sure. Like, so, um, once we, like, you mentioned COVID, that thing,
Mm,
um, the uh, which is really important because so we had a really good first year as far as trying to prove out the business model.
mhm,
And we sort of had the wind at our backs and we were feeling really good. And then COVID hit.
mhm,
Um, but along the way, like in another act of serendipity, last year, this guy, Michael Collins, came into the store with a friend of mine, this guy, Evan Steiner. And, and he's like, you went to Colby, right? And I was like, yeah. He's like, you might know my boss, this guy Drew Simmons, who owns Pale Morning Media, which is a PR firm focused on outdoor brands
Hmm.
in the outdoor industry. And I was like, yeah, I absolutely do. We, as it turns out, we played lacrosse together in college. I was a freshman when he was a senior. And he's like, do you know this guy, Ponch Membreno? And I was like,
Mm.
no. He's like, well, he was also a senior, I think, when you were a freshman. He's like, you should go visit his store. He
Mm.
runs national sales for Toad and Co. And he's
Yay.
based in Freeport, Maine, and you should absolutely go visit his store. And I was like, all right, so he made the connection, and
Mhm.
I went up to visit, and Ponch, as gracious as he always is, like
Mhm.
walked me around the store, and I realized immediately um sort of the caliber of person that I was in
Mm.
front of. Um and I immediately feel like Daniel-san in the Karate Kid. I was like, all right, like I am this punk kid, and like I am sitting here with Mr. Miyagi.
Aw.
um, and and so I had all these I had all these points of validation. um but I also realized that there was something definitely inherently special about Ponch. And so we would go to outdoor retailer, we would have dinner at outdoor retailer, and we would connect there. And we would realize that like his wife grew up like 5 blocks from me in Manhattan.
Wow.
His wife went to St. Lawrence, which is where my wife's family is all from, like that part of the country in upstate New York, or the North Country, New York. And like so there are all these like random things.
Connections.
Yeah, just
Cool.
connections. And so when COVID hit, um Ponch got furloughed. And but one of the things that he did was he offered his time. And he basically went to a series of friends, and he said, I'm going to offer you personal time to help you with
Mm.
this, and I'm going to offer you this time to help you with your business, and I'm going to help you with this to help you write a grant, or like whatever it is.
Mm.
um and um and so I was really fortunate that I was one of those people that he sort of said, like, I'm going to see
Mm.
about helping you.
That's
And
awesome.
I knew uh that uh I had to do everything within my power to try and like nurture that relationship, to try to get Ponch.
Mm.
So ultimately, Toad would decide that they were sort of going to shelve retail for the most part,
Mm.
and Ponch would be available. And then it was for me just making like this really hard fought push to get Ponch involved. And another friend who's an investor type um, said, give him a chunk of the business, like a nice chunk of the business.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay. He's like, here's the thing: is your business definitely has potential, um, but you don't know crap about retail, and anybody who's going to give you money to help your business grow is either going to tell you to go find somebody like Ponch, or they're going to just give you somebody, and you never know how that's going to work.
Mhm.
And so with that, I extended an offer to Ponch, and Ponch
Mm.
graciously said yes. And now, uh his fingerprints are already all over
Mhm.
the business, which, I mean, everybody thought the store looks good before. I feel like the store looks even better now.
Mm.
We have a website.
Yeah.
All of these sort of operational issues that I would have struggled
Mm.
through We talked a little bit earlier about the luxury tax thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
he like solved all these problems that would have taken me days or weeks,
Yeah.
or I would have like just taken my keys to the store and thrown them in the harbor and walked
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
Um,
So Mark, I want to jump in just a little bit. I'm a little bit conscious of time and want to make a couple cool connections. So for whatever it's worth, Ponch is actually our Redbud Suds connection to you as well, which is kind of cool. I've worked with Toad & Co. CEO Gordon Seabury. He's been my mentor over the last number of years, and through that interaction, Gordon introduced me to Ponch because he was like, hey, we should carry Redbud Suds in our stores too.
yeah,
And that seemed like a really good fit. And yeah, I couldn't agree more with you that Ponch is just a stellar human, which is
yeah,
just wonderful. So yeah, it's cool to see as I hear you talk too, there are just layers and layers um of what makes us as people. I mean, we find these connections. We deal with the cards that life throws at us sometimes, which aren't always the most favorable.
yeah,
Or we find ourselves in situations that feel a little bit like, what in the world is going to happen next. And little by little, I mean, I think you've found your way into a business that's really built on your values, which is, very clearly what I'm attempting to do with Redbud Suds as well. And in this world, we rely on each other, and the stories that we tell, being willing to share, the struggles as well as the successes and all of that. So
yeah.
yeah, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to share. So
Well, I mean, and you were asking about brands, and that that it's discovery of brands like yours. The Stio as a brand was really valuable, and what we learned. Um, and Ponch had actually had a relationship with Steve Sullivan, who was the founder of Stio or Cloudveil first, and then sold Cloudveil, and then once his non-compete was up, started Stio. But they send probably 8 to 10 catalogs a year, um, or they send probably 5,000 plus catalogs to the 6 zip codes surrounding us. Um, uh, about 8 to 10 times a year to people around here. Right? So like the awareness and credibility they had built up over time um, became a really important factor of being able to drive people wanting to come to the store.
That's cool.
That's fundamentally important because it's because of a brand like Stio that I get to expose them to a brand like Redbud Suds. And or a brand like Corbeaux. Darcy and Adam own this baselayer brand out of Aspen, Colorado, and they're an amazing couple.
Is that like spelled like French, like C-O-R?
Corbeaux, Corbeaux,
Okay.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
I guess it's a crow. And they're they live it. They're like um, you know, packing it into like the Wasatch Range and skiing down, and they conceived of the business on their honeymoon hiking Mount Kilimanjaro, and um, yeah, like
why not?
oh, and don't get me wrong, like I'm as much of a gearhead as you can possibly imagine. I have bikes, I have skis. There are skis all over this place, and but I I know my own abilities. So while I often get to be surrounded by people who can do amazing things on bikes and skis, I know when to just not follow them. Um, um, but yeah, I mean, it's important that, we were able to win a Stio.
Cool.
And because it also means that we, in addition to Redbud Suds, Ruggette is like a brand that we love right now, which was they're from my alma mater. Ponch is in my alma mater, Colby College, and they make climbing pants that are sustainably made from hemp. But they won an entrepreneurship contest when they were freshmen. And now they're seniors. It took them almost 3 years to get the first pair of pants made. But they're here, like we have them.
Cool.
And they're selling online. They're on Ruggette.com as well. But one of the things that and they're a company that's for women by women. And so the pants are high waisted. There are lots of pockets. They're a really functional pant for climbing, but then they're also really, they look great too. They're just like really styling, good looking.
Cool. Sounds like a fun one to check out. I'll have to do that.
For sure. Like absolutely. And it's interesting, like one of their challenges, and I'm a bit of a mentor to them now, is they're college seniors. And so I think one of them is doing the van life right now, and in the midst of COVID. I know Isabel Adler is a huge proponent of advocacy and wants to do that. And but she's also the sort of creative mind behind the actual pants. And so
a lot to balance.
It's a lot to balance. But you also,
possible.
If I can, guide her to say, if you can build a successful business, what you can do with advocacy will be 10 times more than what you could do if you got out of school and sat down and started writing grants. And it's not to say that you can't continue to do advocacy while you're building the business. We look at companies like, we chose Mir as our private label. So we have like Mir mugs because they're a product to project company. And they've given more than $1 million away for causes all over the world.
That's awesome. Which is actually a really awesome segue for us, because we are giving away one of those Mir mugs. I think now would be actually an awesome time to do our giveaway. And then we could just allow folks, if there are any questions, to ask some questions, and then we'll wrap up here in the next about 5-10 minutes or so. So I am going to bring Amanda back on so that she can help out with the giveaway. Mark, I didn't ask you about this before, but I don't know if you have handy the giveaway items so you can kind of show them off. If you don't, that's okay too. We have pictures on Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah, I do.
Awesome.
I mean, sort of everything's all over the store.
While Mark's grabbing that, you guys know Redbud Suds. We're going to give away a shower bar pack. You get to pick which scent you want per use. So Mark's got, we'll just give him a minute. We've got a Mir mug. We've got the Bitch Sticks chapstick, as well as the Wildly Good socks, which the Wildly Good is a new brand for me. I've not heard of this before, but I feel like I'm going to need to buy some because I'm really curious.
So Wildly Good is, in my view, and that's Bitch Sticks, the best kept secret of a sock.
Watch out, Smart Wool. Watch out, Farm to Feet. Watch out, Darn Tough.
And don't get, like, Darn Tough is, they're like just north. They're we would consider them local,
Mm-hmm.
and friends, and they often partner with like Vermont Glove, which is one of our brand partners.
Hmm.
And but the owner of this business sent us. He hit me up out of the blue and said, "I'm in Rutland, Mass, and I'd love to send you a pair of socks." And I'm like, "Sure, whatever." And he did, and I was like, "Can I have 10 more, please?"
Oh,
And so literally, like, they're the socks that I wear like almost all winter long, unless I'm like going skiing. But
nice.
yeah, they're like just the right amount of stretch, like just the right amount of cushion, like not too thick. They're ridiculously comfortable, and I know like Ponch is one where I was like, "Here, take a pair, try them," and he's like, "Yeah, I wear these all the time."
Oh, that's cool.
So
Awesome.
yeah,
All right, Amanda, let's see it. We've got a little random number thing. Let's make sure we can hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes. Drum roll, please.
The winner is Kendall Ramirez Sanchez.
Congratulations, Kendall Ramirez Sanchez. If you are listening, you can pop your address over to hello@redbudsuds.com, and we will share the info, make sure you get all of your goodies. Or you can also DM or private message us on either Instagram or Facebook. So congratulations. Super exciting. If you have any questions for Mark, feel free to pop them into either the Zoom chat or the Facebook. I'm checking and I'm not seeing any questions at the moment. Mark, I also kind of thought it'd be fun. We didn't quite get to the lightning round. So I might just fire away for you at you real quick, some lightning round questions. I have my little cheat sheet here to see some of your favorite places or your top number one favorite place to adventure. Go.
That's really hard because I live in an area which is just got a bevy of natural resources. I would probably say mountain biking in my backyard, which is basically Wampatuck State Park.
Cool.
Which 10 miles is the crow fly south of Boston. It's I don't know how many acres it is, but every year there is a mountain bike race, which is a 25-mile circuitous route. So it doesn't cross its own path.
Nice.
So it's not a ton of elevation, like not a ton of climbing, but like a really nice mix of technical, single track, and whatnot. But other than that, I mean, like I have a beach, which is pretty awesome for surfing and paddleboarding, which is behind my house.
That's awesome.
So I look at the Atlantic Ocean from my back deck, bedroom window.
That's amazing.
And then one place that's really, really special to us as a family is my wife has lake camps in upstate New York or North Country New York, Lake Titus. And it's like a 2.5-mile stretch of lake. Have to get there by boat.
Nice.
And
that sounds beautiful.
Yeah, they're just family camps up there, and it has plumbing and electricity and all that stuff. But in general, like some of the houses date back to like the early 1900s. Our camp in particular does, and it's interesting. It's just become like an absolute favorite place of my girls, my
Nice.
older girls, especially because I have 17 and 14-year-old daughters from my first marriage, and that it's so meaningful to them is really important to me.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, your favorite adventure food.
All right, so this is a tough one. So like comfort food is tuna noodle casserole, which I know like rubs some people the wrong way, but my wife loves it, which is why I know that we were supposed to be married. But if it's just straight up like adventure food, like food that to eat on the go or like whatever, then I would say a PB&J is like just an easy like
Classic.
yeah, just
Yep.
classic. Like
Yep.
bad bread, like the works,
Yep.
but just throw it in a bag and
Can't go wrong with PB&J. I 100% am with you. And the next one is your favorite book or podcast. You mentioned How I Built This.
I Built This is great. Yeah.
Mhm.
My favorite book, there's a book called The Trail of Heart's Blood, Wherever We Go. And it's by an author, I believe, who's from New Hampshire. But it's not necessarily well known, but it's a really good book. And then as far
You
as
said
other podcasts,
the Trail,
A Trail of Heart's Blood,
the Trail of Heart's Blood. Cool.
Wherever We Go.
Check that
Yeah.
out. Cool.
And then as far as another podcast, I've really liked Smartless as of late.
Not familiar with that one.
Sean Hayes, Will Arnett, and Jason Bateman. And one of them invites somebody onto the podcast, and the other two don't know who it is. They've had amazing guests like Stacey Abrams and Maya Rudolph
Wow. Cool.
and Robert Downey Jr. and like Dax Shepard, and they talk about they had Kamala Harris the day before she became Joe Biden's running mate.
Wow, that would be interesting.
Yeah. They just had who did they just have? What's the why can't I remember her name? The woman who she was in Wild, Legally Blonde. Reese Witherspoon. Yeah.
Good job, Amanda. Thanks for pulling the weight for the team on the pop culture celebrity names.
But Reese Witherspoon was amazing, like talking about her production company, which is, really like focused on women and empowerment and stuff like that. So
cool.
So it's a really refreshing, funny podcast where they all refer to themselves as idiots, so they try to have all these guests that make them feel like they're smart.
Nice. What was the name of that podcast again?
That is Smart Less.
Smart Less. Nice. Cool.
Oh, and one other is I love moths.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Moths. I would love to do a moth at some point.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so good. It has me in tears most of the time, but yeah, it's good. Cathartic tears. Yeah. So Mark, I'll let you pick out of interest of time. We're gonna kind of move a little quick here. Either your biggest wish or your biggest fear.
All right, so getting a little bit deep. Mm-hmm. My biggest wish is that my 3 daughters have great and meaningful lives with as little hurt as possible. And that's related to my greatest fear, which is that there would be a random act of racist hate or misogyny that could harm any one of them. Mm-hmm. So
it's real.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. But true.
Yeah. And last but not least, a person or moment that inspired you.
One person who inspires me, there are probably 2 people, and they're interesting. One is Salema Masekela, who I tracked as a kid because I rode BMX bikes growing up. He refers to himself as an other. And so I find great affinity with that. And that, and he went on to basically become the most well-known host of the X Games for 10, 15 years, whatever. And and so I look at him as with this kinship of being the other. He surfs, he snowboards, all those things, and I'm out here skiing and mountain biking and whatnot. So forever the others. And then the other person would be my cousin Jordan Castile, who's an artist, and she just had the September cover of Vogue.
Whoa, cool. Congratulations.
Yeah, so it's one of her paintings. She got to choose a subject and paint that person as the cover for the September issue of Vogue.
Cool.
So as an artist, she's blown up considerably, but she's continually also one of the most humble people on the planet, who just and she's easily, I don't know, 15, 17 years younger than me. And but it's I remember when she was a baby, like I remember when they were born.
Yeah.
And but watching her today and what she's doing as far as putting humanity to people of color, it's amazing.
That's
And the way
awesome.
the world is responding to her
Mm.
is amazing as well. But I look at that as so much of a reflection of her, her mother. um she's without a doubt um her own self, but she's just been it's been amazing to watch. And it's also amazing that we're exceptionally close, but that uh you know my daughters get to grow up with her as not only friends but family. um it's pretty amazing that they're like, yeah, it's just Jordy, like
Yeah.
it's you know
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yep.
so
That's so cool. So special. Yeah, I feel like I have a lot of hope when I look at the creative work that's happening. And this has been a beautiful conversation, Mark. I really, like I said, appreciate you being willing to share your story, the ins and the outs of it, speak from your heart about some of the things that are difficult to think and sometimes talk about. Um, and honestly, I hope by us continuing to do the work that as we listen within ourselves to what we stand for, what we stand on, the values, the things that really, in the quiet of the night, as we're wanting to build the world that we want to see, and the world that we feel like is a safe one for our children. I hope that we're able to continue doing it, and obviously sharing these stories helps further that along. So
so
yeah.
much for having me slash us. I know Ponch isn't here right now, but um yeah, I mean, it's we really do want to embody um just goodness and decency, and hope that the brands that we have are those that people, we like to refer to ourselves as brand storytellers. So if we can do a good job of telling stories like yours, um, and to help people latch on to, it's more than just soap.
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, and I mean, really, like at the end of the day, like Procter and Gamble and all the big brands in the world spend gazillion dollars trying to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
um, but I think the difference is that we're like we're not trying to hide anything.
Mhm.
And all of the brands that we have are exceedingly honest in um, what they are, what they're about, who they're from,
Mhm.
how they're built. Like when we're watching you guys literally like stir a kettle of
Yep. That's what we do.
I look at Sam Hooper and all his crew like stamping out forms for gloves and mittens, and I mean, it was really cool. Like, I was with Sam and he's like, "Want us to make you a mitten?"
Yep.
Oh, and
We put our heart and soul into every piece we make, it's just kind of how it is.
yeah, and that's so that we can be honest about uh, those those brands and those products, and we it's nice when people respond.
Yeah, it really